This is a passage from the 12th chapter of Romans. Love from the center of who you are. Don't fake it. Run for dear life from evil. Hold on for dear life to good. Be good friends who love deeply. Practice playing second fiddle. Don't burn out. Keep yourselves fueled with flame. Be alert servants of the master, cheerfully expectant. Don't quit in hard times. Pray all the harder. Help the needy. Be inventive in hospitality. Bless your enemies, no cursing under your breath. Laugh with your happy friends when they're happy. Share tears when they're down. Get along with each other. Don't be stuck up. Make friends with nobodies. Don't be the great somebody. Don't hit back. Discover beauty in everyone. If you've got it in you, get along with everybody. Don't insist on getting even. That's not for you to do. I'll do the judging, says God. I'll take care of it. This week I read again from Donald Colross Petey's book, Natural History of Trees of Eastern and Central North America, and reminded myself of his description of the aspen tree. Petey's book isn't simply a tree identifier guidebook. It contains lovingly detailed descriptions and stories of all the trees, not only what a tree looks like and how it can be identified, but also what kind of shade it gives, how the leaves move in the wind, and what kind of sound the wind creates in the branches, whether the nuts are bitter or sweet, how the wood has been used, whether the tree grows on hillsides or in valleys, what kinds of animals the tree supports. There are some trees upon which Donald Colross Petey casts a sympathetic or regretful glance. He has a great deal of sympathy for the blackjack oak, for instance. He begins his description of that tree with these words: "Not all of us can be handsome or famous or of distinguished lineage, and some trees fill a humble station unadmired." And a few paragraphs later, he continues, "For centuries, blackjack oak has been correctly understood in the South as a sign of low-grade soil. A farmhouse among blackjack oaks is usually a poor one. The crops are stunted, the family ragged." Petey is full of admiration for the aspen, though, and he begins his description of that tree by writing about the way it sounds. "Of all our trees, none is more talkative than this. A breeze that is barely felt on the cheek will set the foliage of the trembling aspen into a panic whispering. The small leaves of the aspen make a much softer sound, high and delicate, than the coarse cottonwoods. And as they rustle, they also twinkle, their lustrous upper surfaces forever catching the light, like thousands of little mirrors flashed in mischievous fingers to dazzle the eyes." Petey goes on to talk about the way the aspen has interacted with the world around it. He talks about the aspen log that was kept burning all year long in the open fireplaces of the Hudson's Bay Company trading posts. He talks about the creatures that depend on the aspen. The inner bark, even though bitter, is the favorite food of the beaver, and aspen poles are the preferred material of beaver dams. Porcupines also feed on the inner bark and live in the aspen's branches. The winter buds are devoured by grouse. Snowshoe rabbits feed on bark and twigs, and through all seasons, the moose finds browse in the tree. I myself could not have told you that the wind whispering its way through the aspen leaves makes a softer, more delicate sound than it does in the cottonwood. Nor did I know that snowshoe rabbits fed on the bark. But there was one thing about the aspen I know that Petey did not, only because my sister is an ecologist. which is this. Although aspens produce an abundance of seeds, they are far more likely to spread by their roots. The roots send out shoots, which eventually become saplings and then trees. You might stand in an aspen grove in Colorado and count hundreds of trunks, but everyone might share the same root system, would be, in fact, the same tree, because each trunk is genetically identical and attached to all the other trunks. Even what seems to be a dead tree is not a dead tree because the roots, nurtured by the other trees in the cluster, survive below ground. When conditions are right, the roots will send up another trunk. In Colorado, there's a cluster of aspen trees, which for several years was considered to be the largest single living organism on Earth, until it was displaced by a fungus, which I think is unfair. The trees stretch over hundreds of acres, varying in size and shape, but genetically identical, each tree a living part of the tree beside it. In the Rocky Mountains, the aspen grove is recognized as its own peculiar ecological zone. Many aspen groves are on moist sites where shrubs and wildflowers also thrive. Choke cherry is found in the shade of the aspen grove, and the berries are a source of food for many animals, from grouse to bighorn sheep. The cream-colored flowers of the columbine bloom beneath the aspens, as do the fuzzy pink flowers of the showy loco. Broad-tailed hummingbirds dart between the trees. They are especially fond of the abundant nectar of the columbine. Violet-green swallows and mountain bluebirds nest in cavities in the trees. The red-naped sapsucker drills into the aspen bark and feeds on the sap that oozes from the hole. The porcupine sometimes makes its den in a hollow trunk. And of course, the beaver makes ample use of the aspen, both for nourishment and for building material. To all of these animals, to the flowers and the associated trees, it really doesn't matter that the trees they live among are actually the same tree. And although I think that Donald Kohlrausch's Petey would certainly have mentioned this fact about aspens if he had known it, I don't think it would have altered in a single degree his description of the way the wind shakes the leaves of the aspen, or changed his description of the way the aspen grove blazes with yellow light when the sunshine slants through on an autumn day. To every bluebird or swallow nesting in the trunk, to every porcupine munching away on the bark of an aspen twig, each tree stands out as an individual in its own right. Scientists may consider each trunk a clone and call each trunk not a tree, but a rammet, and call the whole organism, again, not a tree, but a genet. Scientists may make those distinctions, but they are fairly meaningless to the life the aspens support, as they are to any naturalist resting beneath the branches and listening to the wind shake the leaves, or to any trapper in the far reaches of the Hudson's Bay sledding up logs to keep the fire going. When I think about the aspens, when I think about the way each tree stands up in its own right, catches its own rain, knows the sun at a slightly different angle, is home to this particular bird or that particular bird, how the columbine grows beneath one aspen and the showy loco beneath another. When I think about the aspens, I think about what a fitting image they are for the life of the church.
Where's chat?
Like an aspen tree, each one of us supports the life around us.
Dan, we lost you.
You lost me.
Dan, we lost you.
Yeah.
No
Okay.
verbal. Probably a minute ago.
Let me try something.
The other remote people can still hear. I don't know, it must just be Fairview. I can still hear you, Dan, Jessica.
Yeah, and Gail is gesturing that she can still hear me. I don't know why that is. Let me see if I can chat with Wayne.
Okay.
There we go.
You should be back.
I should be back. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So exactly where did you lose me?
Back when we couldn't hear you.
Well, I'm sure I was waxing poetic about the aspen tree, but precisely where?
Okay, the guy who wrote the book,
Yeah,
he might not have really appreciated it because it wasn't known at that time.
okay,
That's a good place to start.
all right.
But the individual life depended on the trees, and the naturalist sitting under the tree.
Did
saw it
not,
as a tree.
okay,
Saw it as an individual tree, not part of the whole.
all right. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm just trying to find it. Ah, there it is. So not that far away, okay. When I think about the aspens, when I think about the way each tree stands up in its own right, catches its own rain, knows the sun at a slightly different angle, is home to this particular individual bird or that particular individual bird, how the columbine grows beneath one aspen and the showy oak beneath another. When I think about the aspens, I think about what a fitting image they are for the life of the church. Like an aspen tree, each one of us supports the life around us in some way. Each one of us has our work, the work that God has called us to. Maybe inventing, maybe parenting, maybe helping others heal. Whatever the work is that God has led us to, or this is our hope at any rate, that what we do is what God had in mind for us. For each of us, it's a different work. And as we do that work, we are our own individual trees. But we are bound together beneath the surface by our communion in God's love. Quaker author Howard Brinton once wrote, "Worshippers are like the spokes of a wheel. The nearer they come to the center of all life, the nearer they are to each other. Having reached the center, they become united in a single life through the creative love of God." I think about this passage and I think about an aspen grove, and I think that in worship, when it works as Brinton describes, we feel ourselves to be down among the roots of our life. But when we leave worship on Sunday, we're back to being our own trees, and we feel our life in the trunk and the branches and the different individual birds resting and feeding among the leaves. I think we tend to feel ourselves to be quite alone, really, and the communion of the worship experience on Sunday, that experience of being moved to a common center and woven together into a single life through the creative love of God, that experience is far away and has lost its power. I think that's how we feel it, but I think it doesn't have to be that way. As we do the work that God leads us to, as we become who God desires us to be, our roots are connected. We are living in the same life. It should be possible some way for us to feel that. It should be possible that as our own little patch of ground goes through a time when it doesn't have enough water or enough light, it should be possible that in those times, the interconnectedness of our lives, the root system that we draw on, can send some extra nourishment our way. It should be possible that our life in the church, our life as a community of faith, can hold us up in the hard times. How can we make it that way? How can we make it that our life in the church is the life of aspens rather than the life of blackjack oats, poorly supported on poor soil? I wish I had a formula for how we could instantly become an Aspen Grove type of church. I think the passage from Romans with which I started, using the Message translation because that always helps me to see the real and intimate relationships that Paul wants to talk about. I think what Paul describes in that passage is one way we can become connected in the same life. Something as simple as laugh with your happy friends when they're happy, share tears when they're down, etc., etc. It reminds me of something that Jim Newby from Cincinnati Friends has written about and lectured about and led retreats about for 25 years. He speaks about life in community as a way of recovering spiritual passion. One of the points he makes is that the authentic, beloved community is a place where we can tell and retell our stories until we ourselves come to understand what they mean to us, or to expand. In the Aspen Grove Church, we talk to each other about the things that have meaning to us. One aspect of these conversations, Jim says, will necessarily have to be the aspect of pain. He says, community is a place where we process our pain together, where we can be open about our pain. There is no intimacy in community without the sharing of each other's pain. That's a tough idea. It takes a commitment of love to be willing to share each other's pain, and it takes a commitment of love and trust to be willing to offer one's pain to be shared. I remember a Bible study group I led once. I've probably mentioned this before, in which someone said to me, you know, when you get to be our age, it's just better to let sleeping dogs lie. We don't really want to talk about that stuff. And I have respect for that point of view. I find as I get older that there are past injuries I really am now able to leave behind. They may have shaped my life, but the shaping is done, and I no longer need to tell that story. And I also understand that it sometimes seems that the world we know is full of all the pain we can handle without adding somebody else's pain to the mix. But the kind of problem for community is that the sorrows and disappointments are there anyway. We can refuse to talk about them, but they don't go away. And since we are, in fact, a single life in God's love, we feel the pain whether we look straight at it or pretend it isn't there. And the pain that we carry as individuals, our unmet goals, our troubled relationships, our resentments about the weights we carry or about not being listened to, our failures of nerve, our lack of wisdom. These things affect the life of the entire community, even those persons who would rather let sleeping dogs lie and not hear the stories. For myself, I find it easier to love the person who irritates me when I have some understanding of what informs their actions. So I come down on the side of knowing the sad and unhappy stories rather than being affected by those stories without knowing what they are. That's one reason I think our time of joys and concerns and prayer requests is so important. I know it's hard to get up and say something about your life. I know it's hard to think that your own troubles are worth troubling anyone else about, or else they just seem too embarrassing to mention. And yet, in the church, that's what we're supposed to do. That's our job, to laugh with each other, to share one another's tears, to be friends with everybody, to discover beauty in everyone. By calling us here mysteriously to worship together in this particular place with these particular people, this Friendship is one part of the work to which God calls us. I've come to cherish the idea of the Aspen Grove Church. And prayer for each other, telling our stories, laughing and crying together, maybe that's what will help us get there. To that place where we feel the strength of our connected roots, even as we know and feel our own separate trunk and our own individual breezes.